I'm your producer, Todd Bartu, and this is Offshore Explorer. Offshore Explorer looks at the world from the mariner's point of view, port by port. Together, we share stories that detail the important intersections between sailing, culture, and life, past, present, and future. Coming up on today's episode, the protocol of checking in, which includes homemade wine, the mafia, spies, men with guns, and pretty women. But first, let me introduce our host, a lifelong sailor who has traveled the world, raced international 14s, and crossed the Atlantic countless times. A published author who has written for both stage and screen, Mr. Scott Dodson.
Thank you, Todd. Always so generous with your compliments. I appreciate it.
So last week's episode was about Simi, Greece, which makes it sound like an amazing island that I would love to go visit once we are out of our stay-at-home orders. And we had a great response to the episode. So what is today's episode about?
This episode is about protocol, and that's checking in from one country to another country. We'll be checking in with Italy and checking in with Tabarka, Tunisia. Both very different kinds of countries, both have different kinds of requirements to get into the country, and both provide really interesting stories.
Great. Take it away, Scott.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate that very much. Today's title is Protocol. Whenever you're sailing into different countries, you have to deal with immigration and customs. It's not like the airport. Because you're bringing in a very large and expensive object. Sometimes it could be very difficult, and sometimes it could be very simple. The people that deal with mariners in most countries are generally very, very nice. They understand. You can work with them. If there's a piece of paper you don't have, they will advise you, and you have a chance to go around. Now, with that said, the United States Customs and Border Patrol are the worst and have the worst reputation of anybody in the world as a bureaucracy. They have created nonsense for a lot of people and for sailors as well. But I'm not going to get too much into them because that's a couple of podcasts of lambasting the way they do business and just their general attitude. What I wanted to talk about with protocol is to show two different ways of doing business, so to speak. One, checking into Sicily, and the second, checking into Tabarka, Tunisia. Two vastly different countries, customs, ways, and some sort of really interesting stories about the whole how it works kind of thing. So I ended up going into Palermo every year, twice a year. It's like a biannual stop. The fuel dock there is run by this really nice man named Angelo. Most yachts and stuff, they don't stop in Palermo. Palermo is a real industrial port. They have drilling rigs there. They have giant industrial whatever is all in this port. So it's the marina there, or where you dock, is just along a quay. It's very small, it's very local, and they don't get a lot of visitors. The port itself is not very pleasant. The water is greasy. There's industrial smells. There's like welding going on across the way. I mean, it's just a real live port. They build some ships, they build oil rigs, they build a lot of stuff in there, and they've got ships coming in and out, and tugs, and God knows what else comes in and out of that port. It's not a usual stop for yachts transiting from the Eastern Med to the Western Med, or in my case, from the Eastern Med through the Western Med and to the Caribbean. But I stopped there kind of by accident, actually, because I was sailing from Gibraltar to Greece, and I was going to go through the Straits of Messina, kind of sort of the shortest distance between 2 points. And I had absolutely no wind whatsoever for 3 days. So all I did was motor for 3 days. And I figured, you know what, I better get some fuel. So I went into this fuel dock, very commercial, and I met Angelo. He was so happy to see me. I had a big American flag on the back of the boat, and his children were living in America, and he was a lover of America, and he filled up the boat with fuel, and he talked to me. He gave me like the best price. He said, "Don't worry, everything's going to be great." There was a young kid there. He sent him out to get some really good Sicilian sandwiches. He just was happy to talk to an American. The sandwiches arrived. I paid for the fuel. I paid for the sandwiches, which I got a real bargain on the fuel, by the way. Now I went to start the engine and the fan belt broke. So Angelo helped me find the right belt. And I will tell you this. This is just a little note to boaters. Whenever you buy something, make sure it's positively the right size. I bought this belt, and it was folded up and wrapped up, and it was in a bag. And it was marked the size, the type of belt, and everything else like that. When I took it out of the bag, it was a different belt. Somebody had put the wrong belt in that. I had this happen to me on my steering pump. It had a little tiny, very specific belt, and it was in the wrong package. I ended up hand steering for close to 12 days, exhausted the crew. Hand steering is hard to do if 24/7. And so anyway, just a word of advice on that is just please, take the stuff out of the package, make sure it's exactly the right thing. Even if the numbers all say it is, don't trust them. Just make sure you do that, because at the end of the day, you'll find more mistakes by doing that than you will. You don't want to find that when you're out in the middle of a storm and you need this part to work right now. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, the fan belt broke, and Angelo helped me find the right belt. We jumped in his late model Mercedes, and he said, you can stay the night, and let's start running around Palermo. So he's giving me the nickel tour around Palermo in the car, and it was like we're driving 60 miles an hour down side streets in residential neighborhood in Palermo, which is a very densely packed city, and it was fabulous, but it was also terrifying, because he drove like he talked, and he talked like he drove, and it was maddening. And he says, "This is, I was married down on this street. That's the church my daughter was baptized in." When we go around the corner, he says, "Oh yeah, you can really get a great sandwich here." And we're going around and around and around. But it was this great, wonderful enthusiasm. And you can't stop it. It's just great. And so we went back, and we went to the port captain's office, and I had all my papers. And Angelo, of course, knew the port captain. They went to school together and grew up together. And the port captain looks at me and he says, "What do you want?" And Angelo says he wants to check in. And he looked at Angelo and he looked at me. He says, "But you're an American." And I said, "Yes, but I have to check in. I'm coming from a different country." You know what I'm saying? And he looked at me and he goes, "Yes, but this is Sicily. It's the 51st state of America." He says, we celebrate Thanksgiving. Everybody has a father, a son, an uncle, a cousin, a daughter. All live in America. They come back. This is America, 51st state. But I'll do it for you anyway. So he ended up stamping on my passport, and doing all the paperwork for the boat and all the rest of that. And I was just like, okay, this is cool. This is about the easiest check-in. And then how much do I have to pay? Right, that's always the next question. I think I paid, and if I remember this correctly, it was about $5.60 check-in to Italy. That was it. Some countries it's expensive, like a permit to check in and be in Turkey is like close to $800. It's probably more now. But a lot of this stuff is you learn as you go along. So anyway, I was incredibly happy. We got out of there, and so Angelos is, well, you could put the boat here, and we tied up stern to. And I had to rearrange the boat because I was side to take the fuel. And then I was going to be at the end of his section of fuel dock right next to where the marina start. Now the marina, if I wanted to stay a night in the marina, it was $150. But since I was on his side, I was right next to a boat in the marina. The line was there, so I didn't have to pay. And in fact, Angelo said I could stay there for free for a few days if I wanted. So I made some different plans, and I was going to have to wait there in Sicily, in Palermo, for about 4 or 5 days until my crew showed up. My mate at the time, Laura, was with some friends, and they were backpacking through Europe while I was sailing across the ocean. And she and her friends were on their way, and because as soon as I got to Rhodes, Greece, I would start the charter season, and they would, she would be there as the mate and the cook and stuff like that to do it. So they decided that they would meet me in Palermo instead of meeting me in Greece. And so that was the plan. So I was going to stay there for a little bit. And actually I was quite happy to stay there. Even though the place was dirty and noisy and smelly, it was very secure. At the end of the quay, there was the gendarmerie was there with machine guns and gun emplacements, and the checkpoint, you couldn't get down this street without going through this checkpoint. And it's kind of disconcerting when you're in a foreign country and you see people walking around with Uzis and machine guns. Or when you go to the bank, I had to go to the bank to get some money out of the bank that I was going to have transferred there, which only takes a day or two. But you can't get in the bank without passing a guard who's standing there. It's not just a hired guard, but it's a part of the police force. He's standing there with an Uzi or two of them to protect the bank. And this was during a period when the mafia in Sicily was very, very strong. And they dominated everything in all of Italy, not just Sicily, but all of Italy. And I'm leading up to this because the boat that was right next to me was owned by Antonio Di Matteo, who was Italy's most famous prosecutor. He's the one that won the case that destroyed the mafia and put them all in jail. I was there not too many months before that. The other prosecutors that worked with him had been killed in bombings, one of which was killed on the road from the airport by a giant pipe bomb. So this is the atmosphere. Industrial, machine guns. But everybody in Italy is living free. Everybody is happy. And they're going along and they just tolerate this or accept this to a certain degree. And then it's on. So it's an adjustment for somebody who's not used to it, who's an American, who's coming into this with new eyes and open eyes and bright. thinking everybody's equal and thinking, we're protected and all the rest of this kind of stuff is far from the case. Very different now, of course, but back then it was far from the case. So while I'm on the boat, I'm just going to go ahead. I've got people coming. I'm going to go ahead and stock up. So I went to the market, Palermo, which is, if you have a bucket list, please put this on your bucket list. This is a market you have to go to. The food, the fresh seafood, the organic vegetables, garden stuff, absolutely amazing. And the antipasta that you could buy and taste, the spices, the olives, unbelievable olives. And you can just walk along and you take a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's crazy. And in the fish part of the market, when I was there, they had a giant swordfish. And they were cutting the swordfish, cleaning it. They had cleaned it and they were cutting it up into servings. And people were standing in line for this piece of fish to come out. And they had bream and they have sardines and, all sorts of different fish, lots of different crustaceans, like langoust. They also have a lot of shrimp. The market is just a wonderful place. They have people that have little grills and they're grilling different meats. And of course you can get any kind of charcuterie that you want, different kinds of salamis and bolognas and pepperonis and, the whole thing. And it's just absolutely wonderful and tasty and it's definitely bucket list stuff. Let me tell you, it's definitely bucket list stuff. So on the way back, I see this little boy and he's sitting on a milk box and he's got 5-gallon jug of wine in a basket. Those baskets that you see with the glass bottle inside, 5 gallons. And he's selling it and I say, oh yeah. And so he gives me a glass to taste it. So I taste it and this is completely unsanitary. Here's a glass. He wipes it off with his shirt, which was filthy. Fill it up, taste the wine. It was delicious. It was very it was homemade. It was very red and fruity, but it had a nice body to it. And I thought, oh, okay, this is some pretty good stuff. I said, well, can I have a bottle? And he looked at me, didn't speak English, and he looked at me with these big old brown eyes. And he kind of said, yeah, I could, a bottle. And he was going to give me the whole 5-gallon bottle. And I said, okay. I said, how much is it? Quanto? And he's got a little thing and it's like $10. I said, okay, let's go. I said, I'll buy it. But so what happens is rather than me taking this jug with me, is the little boy picks it up and he's going to carry it. Now you have to understand, this boy, he couldn't have been 8 or 9. And this 5-gallon jug of wine was pretty heavy for him, but he was determined to carry it. And it's quite a ways, not a long ways, it's a good walk from the Palermo marketplace to the port. But it's neat. It's a nice walk. So, big streets, boulevards. So here I am, and it's almost like a movie from the 50s, right? I'm walking along with all these groceries in my arm and hands, and he's following me with this giant 5-gallon bottled basket of wine. So, and he's dying all the way. So, and he's got slippers on and he's just ill prepared for this whole thing. So anyway, we go through, and the police that guard, the checkpoint before you get in the marina, they weren't going to let him in with the wine. I said, this is my wine. You have to let them in. And they weren't speaking any English. They knew a little bit. It was like this crazy thing. And it's like, and the little boy was just like, wasn't afraid of them at all. He was like very belligerent. Like, you can't stop me. So we walk down the quay, and we get to the boat, and I see Angelo. He's in his office right behind with a fuel dock. And Angelo comes out, and I said, "Oh, Angelo, hey, I need your help here. Could you translate? I want to buy the wine." He says it's like $10, and what's the case? What are we going to do? Help me out with it. So he makes this translation, and as it turns out, the boy is selling the wine for $10, but the bottle and the basket are separate, and he will not sell those because he has to take them back to his grandfather because that's all they have. Okay, so luckily I had plastic gallon jugs that I had filled with water in the boat, sort of emergency water that I kept on the boat. In fact, I used to keep the water in the showers so that rather than using the water in the boat, you could use the gallon jug water to rinse yourself off in the boat, in the shower. And so I had a bunch of empties. So I ended up, and I filled it. It was actually exactly 5 gallons. All right. So I poured the wine into the plastic jugs. I gave the boy back his thing, and I gave him like $20 because it just seemed to me like it was unfair to take this wine for $10. And I said, here, spend it on yourself, buy some shoes and this, that, and the thing. And Angelo, he said, that's too much. You shouldn't give him so much. There's a way to do this and a way not to do this. And this is not a good way. So the boy leaves after Angelo's talked to him. A couple of hours later, the boy shows up with his grandfather, and they're both carrying jugs of wine. He thought the tip was for more wine, $10. So now I got 10 more gallons of wine, but I have to find some place to put it in. So I said, okay, great. Luckily, I had actually quite a few gallon jugs left. I managed to put them in a bunch of different vessels, and anyway, I got all the wine back, and they walked off with their $20. And as Angela was looking at me and smiling, like, I told you so, kind of thing. We just kept going. It was pretty hilarious. So the next day, I went to the train station. And if you've ever seen the train station in Palermo, you'll be shocked that you see all these, swastika, Nazi symbols up on the relief at the top of the train station. It's like, dude, what's this? Well, it is from fascist times when Mussolini, he rebuilt this station. And in fact, Mussolini plays within our podcasts quite a bit in the future because of what he did in Greece as far as restoration and a number of other things in Italy. But anyway, we'll get into that a little bit later. But so to see that, it's kind of shocking. But really, what it is, it was a symbol that was a part of the Roman era. And it was a symbol of power and all the rest, and it was representative of the Roman legions, and that's what those symbols were. And the Nazis just started using them, and now we see the swastika. That's of course what we think, but originally it was a Roman symbol. So the train station is very beautiful, very elaborate. Classic, neoclassic architecture and this kind of thing. But there's an oval, there's a circle, and the traffic is ridiculous. Nobody stops. Okay, the light is green, are red, are yellow, are whatever, the traffic is moving. Nobody pays attention. It's chaos. I watched I stood next to an old woman and we tried to cross the street. Nobody would stop. So we had, and even when the light changed, hardly, the cars would kind of slow down. Oh, it's a red light. Okay, but I'm making a right-hand turn onto the circle, so I can go. And it's 6, 8, 10 lanes wide. And it's all going in the circle, and it's just pandemonium with cars. Very pandemonium. So I'm going to pick up my mate and her friends on the boat so they, when they get off the train. So we're standing there trying to get to traffic, and here comes this woman. And I will tell you this is I've never seen this before. Only in the movies. She's got the big floppy hat on, the sunglasses. She's tall. She's shapely. She has a beautiful summer dress on. She's carrying her purse in her hand with her arm cocked upwards. And she has on high heels. And she just looks like, she could be Sophia Loren's sister. And she just walks. She never stops. She just walks off the curb right into the traffic. And the old lady that was standing there looked up at me and just smiled, kind of this toothless grin. And I remember she had hair, a lot of hair on her chin. But in any case, she just looked at me and kind of gave me the eye like, this is our time to go. And off we went, and we followed this woman. And the traffic stopped. Cars screeched to a halt. People got out, whoa, whoa, and they're screaming and yelling and stuff like that. Then the one word that sort of came over the noise of the traffic and people screaming about why they had to stop was Bella, Bella, Bella. And she just walked across that street with us in her tow, and we stepped across. No, and the people in the car just did put their hands up, Bella, Bella, Bella. Anything for a beautiful woman. It's so quintessential. Unbelievable. So I got my friends, my mate, to come back, and we went over to the boat. And at this point, I had 15 gallons of red wine. So I was pretty well set for red wine. And we had a big dinner, and her friends, one friend came from North Dakota, where she was from, and then she picked up 2 other friends along the way that were, she knew somehow, or whatever the case may be. So we just had a great time. We had a great dinner. It was good to see everybody, and it was super, 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 super. And I only say this and make this kind of remark is because the next day, Antonio Di Mentio came to see his boat. This is the famous prosecutor judge that prosecuted all the mafia guys and got them in jail. So he shows up with 12 bodyguards and 3 cars, right? And they're all in suits with Uzis. They're like the Secret Service. Because this guy is the judge he's like the Department of Justice guy for the whole island of Sicily. He's a very important man. And he has bodyguards everywhere because his life is being constantly threatened by the mafia while this trial is going on. But he's a boater. He likes fiddling around on his boat. And of course the bodyguards, they see all these young girls who are all in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're all pretty, and they're sunning on the deck in bikinis. And these guys, anybody could have attacked us at that point. And these poor Italian bodyguards would not have reacted very quickly because their head was someplace else. And the girls were all very impressed because they were all quite handsome and muscular, and they carried big guns. And it was kind of a weirdly funny moment. So the judge and I, we had a little bit of conversation about the boat and this, that, and other thing. And he was a little bit, his depth finder wasn't working very well, and he asked me some questions about that, and so I went on his boat, and we fixed his depth finder. It was just basically a bad connection. That happens sometimes with those because they're down, in the hull at the bottom. Of water gets in there, and rust will crawl up the coating, and you have to just clip it off and reattach it, and it worked out just fine. The time came for me to leave. Everything had been paid for. I had met Italy's most famous judge, who was a lovely man, and we decided we were ready to go. Okay, so we packed up everything, said goodbye to Angelo, and cast off. And me and the girls took Delphus out of the port, through the Straits of Messina, and we crossed the Ionian into Greece, and eventually we went all the way to Rhodes, where we began the charter season. Now, on the way back, I would also stop in to see Angelo. And, they weren't all so dramatic. I never did find that young boy again with the wine, even though the wine was great. And I drank the wine for the whole summer. And I think everybody liked it. It was a good drinkable, homemade Italian wine. But that's when you travel. Those are the kinds of things that you remember. It's like you don't remember some expensive $300 or $400 bottle of wine you have. You remember it. It's like, yeah, okay, that was great. But you remember 15 gallons of red grape juice. That's really, pretty funny. And how you got it makes the flavor even better. And that's really what we're talking about here. I decided to sail the coast of North Africa. This is somewhat dangerous, somewhat interesting, but actually pretty cool sailing. The Scirocco is just beginning to set. So you have some pretty steady winds coming from the south. And it's essentially a beam reach. And you're just going along the coast. Now, a couple of it's kind of important to know that some of the coasts are dangerous and others aren't, right? The first coast that you have to sort of stay away from is Libya. And this is during a time when Muammar Gaddafi was there. There was nothing that they would love more than to capture an American boat or whatever and make a big deal of it. So it's important to stay. In this case, we were about 60 miles off the coast. We were literally followed by a Libyan cruiser that left a pall of smoke. I mean, the engines must have been on their last legs. And it was painted white. Weird military ship. There actually was, I think it was an English made cruiser that was done probably made after World War II, designed wise, etc. And but anyway, they followed us. But even though we were clipping along at about 7.5, 8 knots, just steady, I don't think they could actually keep up with us, to be quite honest. But in any case, Libya is one country you wanted to avoid. Probably a good idea to avoid it today. Then after Libya, you get Tunisia. And Tunisia is a pretty cool country. I feel bad about all their civil strife and stuff because the Tunisian people are really, from what I've met, are really, really nice place. And Tunisia is just a beautiful place. I mean, the ruins and the deserts and it's got this French flavor as well. It's really quite an incredible place to visit. So we sailed all along the coast. We're fairly close. And what's remarkable is that it's remarkably green. North Africa along the Mediterranean coast is quite green. I mean, there are points that I saw where the desert the desert sand sort of spills into the Mediterranean. But for the most part, it's very, very green. A lot of fishermen. It's an interesting sail, but it's a very quick sail. We were going along. We ended up having to pull into Tabarka. I wanted to pull into Tabarka just because I wanted to check into Tunisia. I wanted to see what it was like. And this time it was like October. So it was really off season. And when we went in there, we had a big deal to get cleared in for 1 night, 2 nights actually. And that's the part I'm going to tell you about, relating back to the idea of the protocol. So here comes this big American boat. There's really nobody in the marina. They have a music festival in Tabarka. There's this big old Genovese castle there. It's very famous for its red coral. Not the fiery red coral that'll hurt you, but it's almost like when you bring it up, it's almost like a plastic. It's used in a lot of jewelry, and people dive on it. It's a pretty interesting dive site. But it's just a dusty little town for the most part. So we were in there, and we had to, obviously, here we go. We have to check in. As I just said with Sicily, checking in was $5.60. And why the hell are you checking in? This was a little bit different. So the customs official comes to the boat. They literally were standing next to the boat just at the time I was tying up. So they have to see the papers. We'll go through the papers and everything. Now, I speak a little French. Not great, but enough to get through these sort of circumstances. But at the time, I had 3 other sailors with me. One was Swiss French, so his French was very, indigenous. And English guy and an American guy. And that was my crew for taking the boat from Europe back to the Caribbean. And one of the reasons that you can get crew to go in that direction is that we would arrive in time in Antigua that the mates could go and get jobs on other boats. So it's the part of the migration of boat workers back and forth across the Atlantic. So this was a really, it was a great trip. We all had fun. It was just simple. But checking in was sort of a weird thing. So the customs official looks at my papers and he says, you have to be inspected by the moral police because this is a Muslim country. Okay. So this guy shows up in a uniform and he is the moral police. He asked me if I have any movies or books or pictures that are lewd. And no, not really that I would think, but I don't know about you. I don't know what the parameters are here. So he said, well, let me look at your videos. So we go through, and this is funny because I had a guest on that worked for a big movie company, and she put me on a list to get videos, the same list that they would send out sample videos for video store owners, which don't exist anymore, but I had about 400 videos over time that I had collected on the boat. And so he went through he looked at all the things, and I don't think he spoke English very well. And one video that he picks out of all the videos is Pretty Woman, which is about a prostitute. So he wants to see it. I said, sure, you could take it with you. You could take it home. I've seen it. I don't need it. And, he was like, he was very formal. He wasn't going to be doing that stuff. He would confiscate it, but he wouldn't just take it home. So he puts it in, and I'm standing there as we're going through, and I gave him the remote control, and he's fast forwarding, from scene to scene to scene to scene. And if you remember, there's a scene where Richard Gere is sitting down, and she's going to give him a BJ, right? And she's on her knees in front of him. He turns it off right before that. and then stamps the papers and gives me the papers to say everything is okay. I said, do you want the video? He goes, and he just looked and he said, no. And he left, and we got approved. So it goes through was that 3/4 of the way through the movie? Halfway through the movie? There's no rhyme or reason. I don't think he understood what the movie was about to start with. I think he just thought that it said woman, so that had to have been the key thing for him. So I got my stamp papers, and now it was time for me to go to the police station. Which is always a little kind of, I don't like going to police stations in general. Because you're really out of your element. You've got no control over the situation. So I take my Swiss-French mate with me, and I say, look, I'm just going to not speak French. You speak French if they ask you questions in French, and just let me know. So we go into the police station. We sit. There's 2 desks. There's one for the immigration officer, who was the first time I'd seen him, and then the customs officer, who was sitting right across from us. So they're both looking at my ship's papers, and a trick for anybody that's going to go cruising in different countries, they're always going to ask you for a crew list. So my suggestion is to make yourself a nice official looking stamp, because not only want a crew list, they want stamps. They love stamps. All these people love to have things stamped. This is their life. I need a good stamp. So I had a stamp made up with Daffy Duck on it. Okay. And so I stamped everything. All my papers were stamped with Daffy Duck. And they would look at it and think it was amazing. Okay, this is good. That was approved. Some sort of authority had approved your paperwork, even though it was Daffy Duck. It was a joke, but they thought they see the stamp, that's it, they're done. So the customs guy is talking to me about this, and my French friend mate is trying to go on about this. Well, I don't understand. The boat is this, and what do you have? Do you have liquor on the boat? Do you have food on the boat? Do you have this on the boat? Where are you coming from? Where are you going to? We've never had anybody like that here. And how many people you have, Americans and stuff. So in the beginning, they actually suspected that we were with the CIA. That's what they suspected. They were very paranoid about spies. Didn't realize it in the beginning, but I did realize it like the next day. So we go through this whole thing, and finally, I said something in the conversation. We're in this office for like 45 minutes, and I said something to the mate in French, who was speaking French and translating and stuff like that. And I said something in English that was a joke. And I turn and I look, and both these clowns are laughing. So they understood English. They were just trying to press me by speaking French. So then I started to speak French. And then they started to laugh. Okay? And the charade was over. Okay? The charade was over. But then they said, okay, we would like to talk to you, Captain, by yourself. So I sent the mate out. So here's what the bottom line ends up. It was about a bottle of Glenlivet Scotch. That's what they would like. That's their quote unquote coffee money. That is a part of the duty, so to speak. And here's how I will pay the duty. The customs officer is going to come with his bicycle, which has a blanket in a basket in the back of the bicycle. And he's going to park it outside my boat. He is going to go over and get the watcher, because I have a watcher on the boat that I didn't know about, who's being paid to sit on a bollard and watch the boat by the government. So he's going to take that person over for coffee. And while they're gone for the coffee, I will come out and put a bottle of Glenlivet Scotch underneath the blanket on his bicycle. That was the deal. And that's exactly what I did. So the next day, there's this big open space, concrete covered space, and the guys, we're all out there playing with a frisbee, and we're gonna sail, but we're just taking a break. I'm ahead of schedule. I'm in good shape as far as getting going, so I'm pretty happy. I mean, seriously, we're in good shape. Waiting for the bread to be baked and posted. They seemed to had a problem at the time, and the entire town would show up at one bakery for the bread and the baguettes and stuff like that. And so we were just out there playing frisbee and having, just guy fun or whatever. And this girl shows up. She's very pretty. She's actually Israeli, and her story was that she had recognized my boat, and when she was in St. John in Coral Bay, and my boat had St. John Coral Bay as its port, registered port. So she starts talking to us, and she's Israeli, and I mean, it's just like this crazy thing, and she wanted to get on the boat to, say hi and all the rest of this. It's good to see you. And do I know you? And do you know this person? Do you know that person? And she says that she lives in Paris now, and she writes erotic literature, and that's her job. And, being goofy guys, we're like, oh yeah, single girl in the middle of Tunisia writes erotic literature. This has got to be interesting. So I decided to invite her for dinner, and we were going to have tuna. We had caught about 20 tuna off the coast of Tunisia. Yes, it sounds crazy, but it's true. And the American guy, Adam, was very intent to be a chef on big yachts and stuff like that. So we were eating tuna 3 meals a day, and he was cooking in every possible way. So she was oh yeah, I'll come for tuna. So she's on the boat with us. We've set the table in the back. It's evening, and the lights are on, and I'm just still had some of that red wine from Italy, and we're just talking, and we've got this beautiful tuna, and along comes the customs guy, or the immigration guy, and the immigration guy says to me that she's a foreigner, and that when she steps foot on my boat, she's in America. So she has to be cleared out of Tunisia to enter into America, and then I have to write a letter for her to be on the boat and giving permission, and then she has to enter back into Tunisia. And I'm like looking at this, like, I've never heard of this. It's kind of generally true, and I'm sure legally there is some truth to it, but it's like, she's just having dinner on the boat kind of thing, right? So I write this paper, I go through the whole thing, I put my Daffy Duck stamp on it, and we have dinner and all the rest of this kind of stuff. I had to walk her home because I was told that I should escort her back to the hotel and let the people in the hotel know that she's back, that I have to personally go. Yeah. So anyway, I do this, and off we go. Very interesting. The relationship, the things we talked about with this girl, she was very interested in what we were doing. She, as it turns out, was, we think, a Mossad agent who was just trying to figure out if we were CIA. That was her speculation. That was also the speculation of the Tunisian government. And therein lies a very, very crazy problem. We couldn't get out of there fast enough. But I got out of there and sailed along the Algerian coast, which is another dangerous coast, or was a dangerous coast, it's not anymore, and headed to Gibraltar. But that's the Tabarka story. That's how you clear it. And that one cost me a bottle of Glenlivet. Sicily cost me $5.60. Very different atmosphere, very different requirements. And that's sort of how you have to deal with the world. You have to be flexible. You have to be ready to go. You have to be ready for tons of games. It's just, I know Americans have a tendency to say, well, this is the rule and you can do that. The rest of the world doesn't work that way. There's a lot of latitude in what rules are. In some countries, rules are sort of just guidelines. But anyway, that's protocol.
So whatever happened to that girl on the boat? Was she really a Mossad agent?
Well, the Tunisian police thought so. They thought we were CIA. The whole, cover story of her being an erotic writer of literature living in Paris, and she's Israeli, and she was just coming there by herself to go diving for the red coral. It's great for our story, but for her cover story, I think it was a bit thin.
I see. Did you ever see her again?
Yeah, we saw her on the way out of the port. She was on a dive boat that just flew past us, and she waved to us as we went by. And that was the last I ever saw her, and probably good riddance at that particular point. But yeah, you get that feeling when you're like in that kind of situation where the political climate is a little bit off kilter, so to speak. You got to move along just to be safe.
Yeah. I bet you meet a lot of interesting characters sailing around the Mediterranean.
Oh, around the Mediterranean. I mean, one guy I became very good friends with in the Caribbean was wanted by Interpol. He was like a major crime figure, but he turned out to be one of the nicest guys I met. That's a crazy story. We'll get to that one eventually.
All right, we'll save that for another episode. So, what do we have coming up next week?
Next week we have this. We have an interview. It's a very special interview with a Portuguese journalist, Rita Garcia. She's going to tell us how, in a very entertaining way, how Portugal has coped with the COVID virus. Their government has done very well in stemming the virus, and the people have stayed home, and how everybody sort of pulled together. It's a really interesting story. It just illustrates how wonderful the people of Portugal are, and we'll get some tips also on grilling fish, grilling sardines. There's a whole art, trust me. So it's going to be a fun episode.
Thank you for tuning in. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Also, be sure to rate and review. You can find us on Facebook and at offshoreexplorer.org. You can also listen to past episodes at offshore-explorer.simplecast.com. Our theme song is sung by Paulette McWilliams, with additional music by Tommy Ivisevich.
Until next time, fair winds and calm seas.
Down in the South Texas streets of Laredo, I fell in love with a sweet Texan girl.